Ezra Tuinomujuni was amongst 2,700 people evicted by the Uganda Wildlife Authority from Chibale Forest Reserve in then Kabarore District, now Kamwenge District, in 1992.
The 1st April, the exercise started. Police, prisons, army started torturing people, burning houses, demolishing buildings, killing animals. The exercise was too rough.
After a protracted struggle, most of the evictees were resettled on this piece of Mailo land in Kakumiro district in Buganda, one of the lost counties that reverted to Bunyoro after the 1964 referendum during the Obote I regime.
People were suffering. People started running to neighboring areas. Some people rushed to Congo. Some rushed to Kisoro. Some rushed to Kabale. And even up to now, there are some people who are still suffering.
Tuinomujuni settled here with his family of now 20, and in spite of several attempts, he and other settlers have not been able to acquire titles and now live in fear of eviction.
This land was just given as a grant to Buganda, who fought against the Bunyoro by 1900.
Most of the titles in Bugangaizi and Buyaga counties are in possession of absentee landlords in Buganda. Tuinomujuni and others who have no legal safeguards face a threat of eviction.
You cannot force me to leave this building and go, unless you kill me. If you don't kill me, I kill you.
But is the land tenure system anchored on the torrent system the problem? Do these conflicts precede the colonial epoch, when tribal wars of conquest and ethnic pogroms redrew boundaries? Or perhaps the colonialists played a part by propping up their allies and nobles and rejecting customary values of land ownership in favor of their Eurocentric views?
This is an evil system, the system which is in Uganda here, this one of Mailo and all that, and some people support it, but it's very bad for the people. And it is not in other parts of Uganda.
To understand the Mailo land tenure system, we have to revisit Buganda's history. In this area, land was communally owned by clans that had settled along the Nalubale Lake during the Bantu migration. Clan heads made decisions on land issues. However, when more clans arrived, a Kabaka was appointed to be the Sabataka.
That is going back about 800 years ago. So a system of land holding developed in Buganda whereby land was vested in the Kabaka on behalf of the people of Uganda.
But as the kingdom expanded, it became difficult for the Kabaka to manage land, so he appointed chiefs to work on his behalf. By the time the colonialists arrived in 1894, the system had become institutionalized. Sir Harry Johnson had special orders from the English monarch to grant freehold estates to the Kabaka, regents, and principal chiefs, also gain rights over unoccupied land for the crown, institute boards of trustees which would administer and protect peasants in rent-free rights to the land they occupied.
Actually, the four principles: to raise funds for the government to function. Well, that was called that tax. And they negotiated a treaty, which is now Buganda Agreement of 1900.
Under the agreement, in the distribution of this land, Kabaka's office got 350 square miles, while the then Kabaka Daudi Chua and his siblings were also assigned land. The hereditary chiefs and other chiefs who had supported the British, including Imbogo, the chief of Muslims, shared 8,000 square miles. The 9,000 square miles that the British had allocated themselves was returned to the Kabaka's custody in 1962 for those who never got land. It was, however, taken over by government and is now under Uganda Land Commission and district land boards.
Local people pointed out to him that we have a land system here where people own land. There are so many people who own land. So he asked them to prepare a list of 1,000 people, which was done. And those are the people who received the 8,000 square miles. And this was land which they already held as their own under the system I described earlier. So The idea that the British took away land from the peasants and gave it away is a political gimmick to make Mailo land hated.
The colonial masters struck similar agreements in other kingdoms, which explains the presence of Mailo land outside Buganda.
So this was now, you see how the colonial man was trying to take over.
Uganda's constitution of 1995 recognizes 4 land tenure systems, namely freehold tenure system, under which one owns land in perpetuity and is entitled to a certificate of title. It is regarded as the most clear-cut land tenure system. Customary land tenure system is based on particular customs, traditions and norms of people in their indigenous communities. Leasehold tenure, under which a lessee has exclusive possession of land through an agreement with the landlord for a specific period of time. The lessee is subject to premium and ground rent to government on public land, to a freehold landowner, Mailo Land Owner, or registered customary land owner. And Mailo Land tenure system, under which land ownership is similar to freehold, but in some cases it creates dual ownership over the same piece of land.
The Kabaka organized a rebellion.
President Milton Obote's abolishment of kingdoms in 1967 created problems for official Mailo or Mailo land attached to holders of traditional offices, while President Idi Amin Dada's land reform decree of 1975 made all land public and stripped landlords of their rights. The wars of liberation that started after President Idi Amin overthrew President Obote and ended in 1986 when President Museveni took power also created new waves of settlers. As thousands migrated towards the central part, land, especially in Buganda, was placed in possession of new occupants who acquired an equitable right, while the legal claim remained in the hands of the landlords and their heirs.
In the politics of our country.
In a move to reward his Baganda allies who had provided a sanctuary for the guerrilla war the NRA waged in Luwero, the NRM government, through the Constituent Assembly in 1994, pushed for the recognition of Mailo as one of Uganda's land tenure systems in the 1995 Constitution. The coming into force of the 1995 Constitution and the Land Act in 1998 turned the Twinomujunis into tenants by occupancy, as this was no longer public land.
If they have proper land titles, let them be compensated, and then we settle here peacefully.
Section 31 of the Land Act protects tenants with or without certificates of occupancy, but often tenants have been evicted regardless of this provision. Section 32A of the Land Amendment Act provides ground for eviction of a lawful or bona fide occupant, and it's only one, non-payment of ground rent for 2 years.
The original Mailo Land Owners have died, and some of their descendants are stuck with this land because it has tenants on it. So what usually happens, they sell off the land cheaply to the so-called big people, who become the new landlords. The new landlords may wait for the time within which the law allows them to evict tenants for non-payment of nominal fees. Others tend to say, I do not know the tenants. They are illegal settlers, lessees or trespassers, categories of tenants that are not protected by the law.
You have a scenario where the landlord does not fulfill his responsibility, which is also in the same Land Act, so not introducing himself. Then also the tenants are not known because they kept on saying, oh, the landlord is absent. But did you take due diligence? Did you take efforts? That's what I'm saying. It is fraud.
So who are the legal occupants? These are Bibanja holders who settled on Mailo land with the landlord's consent, and bona fide occupants who are on the land 12 years before the coming into force of the 1995 Constitution, meaning people who had been on land by October 8, 1983, in the final stretch of Uganda's liberation wars.
It is curious why they made it 12 years and why it coincides with 83. You see, 1983, in a big part of Buganda, there was a war. So we are saying people who occupied land in Buganda during the NRA war are now legitimized. But the other problem is most people don't understand this law even. Even those who don't meet the 12-year mark, who came on the land in 1990, are claiming to be bona fide occupants and are also seeking protection.
The enactment of the 1998 Land Act and subsequent amendment in 2010 operationalized the provisions of the Constitution protecting bona fide occupants and purchasers.
The question sometimes has been to even follow the existing law, unfair or bad as it may be. Who is a bona fide occupant? The one who was in possession, undisturbed, unchallenged by the registered owner by 12 years before the coming into force of the Constitution. Or a purchaser from that person. But not every purchaser. Those were people who purchased before the Land Act came into force. Because when the Land Act came into force, if you wanted to buy an occupancy right, you needed consent from the registered proprietor in a prescribed form. So after 1998, you couldn't buy a chibanja without the written consent of the owner of the land.
This means there are illegal evictions, but there are also many illegal settlers.
When we are evicted, of course, all our developments, we are demolished, we lost it there. Then we came here without having anything. And when we reached here, we started fresh. Now, if you tell me again to live here, instead I just kill myself.
And the government told us that this is a free land. It's a government asset. You stay, nobody will interrupt you.
According to Ministry of Lands, many tenants are not reflected on the main Mailo title and are often labeled trespassers.
They have not encumbered their rights in the land registry. That is not a problem of the land registry. Anybody who is coming now to buy, if the Mailo owner is selling, will carry out a search, and the search will clearly indicate that the land belongs to landlord X and is free of any encumbrance. And that is the beginning of all the problems.
This means that when someone buys land from a Mailo Land owner, the tenant's interest on the land is not reflected on the title.
The potential buyer who is buying, or the new seller who has bought, who usually have money, probably is an investor, wants to use the land, will brand the tenants on the land as trespassers. And ultimately, they connive with some unscrupulous individuals in the law enforcement to evict these people.
For Muhumuza, the undesirable bush he thought his new home was is now attractive and will soon place him in the crosshairs. This piece of land he occupies is barely meters away from the patch of the East African crude oil pipeline.
When we make a research, we find that there is some boss people, ministers, who are just using those people to chase people here. It's because of the developments that people brought and the pipeline which is passing here. They need money.
So is Uganda's land problem primarily linked to the Mailo land tenure system? In part 2 of our series, we will continue interrogating this question. Edward Muhumuza, NTV.